Good evening and welcome to the first MAP15 public forum. My name is Wendy. I am the Business Development Manager for the Melbourne Accelerator Program. And this evening it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Nick Reece and Ed Husic, who we have the pleasure of to host at this public forum. So what I'll do is give a quick introduction for Nick and I'll hand over to him to moderate the rest of the evening. So Nick Reece is a Principal Fellow at the Melbourne School of Government. He is also a Director of Strategy at University of Melbourne Chancery. Nick has considerable experience in both politics and policy making. He was a senior advisor to the former Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard and was also the Deputy Chief of Staff to Victorian Premiers Steve Bracks and John Brumby. Nick is also himself a startup founder. He is a director of The Big Issue, Australia's most successful social enterprise, and he was also one of the original Mobros and a director of Movember, the global men's health movement. Nick has also worked as a lawyer, journalist, and Labor Party secretary. His areas of expertise include public policy, in particular, innovation and infrastructure policy. His other areas of expertise include public sector management, political science, and Australian politics. Without further ado, would you please join me in welcoming Nick Reece.
Thank you very much, Wen. Can I just check that people can hear me around the room? Maybe someone in the back row give us a nod. Terrific, so we're mic'd up. Can I just start by saying a big thank you to Wen and Charlie and Rowan for the invitation to be here tonight. It's a terrific thing that MAP is doing, and it's obviously a very exciting time for MAP and an exciting time in federal politics at the moment as well. Obviously an exciting time for MAP with last week this year's intake of MAP recruits being announced, and I believe next week is the official launch of MAP 2015, so we'll be sure to give you some more details about that as the night goes on. Exciting time in federal politics as well. We saw last week the Abbott government and then the Shorten opposition lay out their alternative visions for Australia, and it was well, there was good things for small business on both sides, I think it'd be fair to say, but it was also particularly pleasing to see that Labor has made a very big play in the area of the startup economy and science, technology, engineering and mathematics. So it's sort of exquisite timing really that tonight we are joined by Ed Husic, who is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Opposition Treasury spokesperson, but also somebody who has been a great driver of innovation policy and startup thinking inside Labor in recent times. Ed, of course, is the federal member for the seat of Chifley, which is in Western Sydney, and he was elected to Parliament in 2010. So that makes him a relatively fresh face in federal politics.
We've got to get the Botox on.
But also, importantly, someone with a lot of energy and drive and ideas. Since his election, Ed's parliamentary interest and focus on the digital economy and innovation is well known. In 2013, he was appointed the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister Kevin Rudd and Parliamentary Secretary for Broadband. And he's also served previously as Secretary of the Federal Labor Party's Economics, Productivity, Innovation and Industry Committee. He also sat on both the Joint Committee for the NBN and the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Infrastructure and Communications. So Ed is very well known for his passion and understanding of the policy detail around how we drive innovation in our economy. So before we get into the Q&A, please join me in making him very welcome tonight. So the format for our discussion tonight is we want to make this very much a Q&A session. So I won't be like Q&A and sort of say it's a comment. It's going to be an open exchange. Everybody can sort of have their say. But in particular, I want to make sure that members of the audience get a say as well. So please be, thinking about any questions you want to put to Ed, and Ed as a sort of key member of the Labor team. I think we've got until 7:30, so we've got about 50 minutes to fill. Look, I might start things off, Ed, and I'm going to start at a pretty broad level. What do you see as government's role in fostering innovation and entrepreneurship? Is there an active role for government to play?
Yes, absolutely. And before I start on that, great to share the platform and to join with you again. I don't know if I should be thanking you for Movember. I don't partake because my ability to grow a moustache is, I'm a bit moustache challenged. You'll be able to pull it off, I can't. Well, I think you're doing a better job.
We do have a division, the most pathetic moustache, which I've been a contender for several times.
Well, thank you for opening up a category that I can now participate in. But it is a very important cause, and it's good, as I said, to join up with you again. And also to you all, thank you very much for being here tonight. The issue itself of how we transform our country, particularly at this point in time where the national wealth that we did generate from, particularly mining, is under a particular, challenge of itself. We're not earning as much, and it's all in the public domain as to what the flow-on pressures are. But what I find is Australians have a very big appetite in this area, Nicholas. They want to talk about this, engage, and work out how we can actually unlock the potential that we know exists. Australia is always recognised as punching well above its weight, that we're able to achieve on the world stage in spite of the fact of what we'd normally think are inhibitors, small size, small population, remote, therefore not necessarily having access to capital and supply and trade links in the way others might have, because they're not an island continent, they're in with other big players. And so people ordinarily will stack the odds against us. So we do have some talents there. The issue is, how does government help? And I've spent a lot of time in the States of my own accord, meeting up with people in various parts of North America, talking about what they do. And two of the things that they do, to come to your, if I can do a rather large circuit to come and answer directly, is I say to people there are two things when I meet with them in the States or anywhere else. I'm not interested in developing big grants programs that dole out money left, right and centre. And I'm not interested in us just replicating Silicon Valley. The tendency for politicians is to go over, see these things and go, we're going to do what you guys did right here. When really the lesson should be what worked for them and how can we encourage that here in Australia. And coming to answer your question, what has firmly stuck in my mind, what works in Silicon Valley is they have this critical mass of people. They're all working together, they're all brought into the one place, and they're not all US citizens. They've come from all parts of the world because they're attracted to what is happening on the ground over there, and they have talent that is then backed up with capital. So there's money there to back up the ideas. And the other thing that is important too is that they've really focused on removing regulatory hurdles. So what I regularly say with my colleagues is what we should be fixed on is this concept of movement. It's about the growth of skill and the free flow of talent in and out of the country. We lose a lot of people because they're attracted to what's happening in Silicon Valley or elsewhere, but we should accept that there is a flow of people. We should also try and improve the flow of capital to support ideas at their most critical stage. And anything that inhibits that along the way in terms of regulatory hurdles or roadblocks, we need to find a way to reduce those. So government can play a role, but I am not of the sort of thinking that may have supported industry policy in times past where government will always be there with a lot of money. There is a role for some government money, and governments do set up co-investment funds, but there are things we can do that can make a difference, and government should be supporting growth of skill, the freer flow of capital, and if there's anything that they're doing differently that can improve that flow, they should do it.
So there's some useful levers for government there, and I guess the federal budget reply by Bill Shorten last week was, I guess, the most expansive statement we've seen yet of what Labor's plans are in this field. I was wondering, here's your chance for a free plug. Let us know, what are Labor's plans in that area?
Well, I begged Bill to make some response because I said that I'd be seeing Charlie Day this week, and I know he wants to get good. He and Rowan want to get good attendee numbers, and so he really threw me a solid there. And you guys have to write a thank you note to Bill Shorten for that. So federal Labor has really been putting in a lot of focus in this area. Like what happened on Thursday night is the culmination of a lot of thought that's been directed, particularly from the guy that I work to, Chris Bowen, who in the budget response last year was saying that in an environment where revenue for government is dropping because you're seeing mining activity fall, what is it that will grow the economy? You can try and find new sources of revenue by taxing people differently, but in an economy that's been impacted by, and we've had the estimate 1% GDP hit as mining investment and job numbers decline as they move from the construction phase to extraction, we need to find new ways to actually spur on growth. And if you look in other parts of the world, where, for example, Enrico Moretti, who's the professor of economics at the University of California at Berkeley, he says for every single tech job that's created in the States, 5 others are created. There is a huge multiplier effect that is spurred on. Jobs in the tech sector, they're growing 25 times faster than others. What do we need to do to encourage or to tap into innovative thinking and investment in innovation to try and evolve our economy post the mining boom? And so that's been a 12-month journey. And we've all been, Shadow Assistant Treasurer Dr. Andrew Lee has looked at, for example, what do we do in the sharing economy? What are the best regulatory settings in the sharing economy that we need to ensure the growth there? So it's not just the Uber and the Airbnb, and actually I'm staying at an Airbnb property tonight here in Melbourne to try and test it out myself. There are other colleagues that are using it as well.
Uber back to your hotel, or has he got the white Commonwealth vehicle escorting you this evening?
You have to ask the embarrassing questions. Thanks. But I actually do have the Uber app on, and I use it quite a lot in the States. And from time to time here you can get it, and in Sydney you can always get an Uber car. Canberra, not so much. Funnily enough, you try and get an Uber vehicle in Canberra and you'll be waiting, you probably get one from Melbourne quicker than you will from Canberra. But it is interesting. So that whole space, people like Andrew Lee have been looking at. Obviously, Chris has got me to look at a number of areas, including how do we open up new sources of funding through, say, for example, crowdsourced equity funding that allows people to invest directly in early stage innovation. And we've been putting forward some ideas off the back of some work that's been done independently of government to work out the regulatory framework that will allow that new form of capital to be available. So we're all working on this space. Jason Clare, very fixed on the whole issue of coding and encouraging coding, not just for itself being important, but to start young people to think about what's required to drive growth in innovation. There are a number of us across a number of areas that have been working on it, and Bill has had an interest in this, when we were in government as well, as workplace minister, and looking at the issue of skills. That is a big issue in our local IT sector where we're not pumping out enough graduates to support demand. So when you get to Thursday, and this is a very long answer to your question, we have been all in our various ways working in this space, and then it comes into this point, but it's not finite. You'll see tomorrow Chris Bowen delivers a speech to the National Press Club where it's a response to the budget, but also we'll map out some further areas in the innovation space that we'll keep the attention on, and we'll keep building that up through announcements that we take before and into the election campaign itself, primarily because not only have we got the pressure of the mining boom declining, but there's this longer term challenge affecting countries all over the world where the number of manual entry-level jobs declining, the number of jobs that require you to have a higher degree of skill and training increasing. And we need to find a way to ensure that people have jobs into the future that will meet the demands of those jobs, the skill requirements of those jobs. So for us, it's an economic imperative, both levering off the optimism of what will come, but also the fear that if we don't move, a lot of people will be left behind.
That's very interesting. I was a friend of mine, and I did an experiment on the weekend. We were in a suburb of Fitzroy, which is quite an inner city suburb, and we decided that he was going to push Uber on his phone, and I was going to push the online app for another taxi company. And the Uber cab arrived in 75 seconds. And I don't know, I think the other cab might still be circling looking for the house. So it was a pretty convincing experiment, I've got to say.
Well, on that, when you'll recall the London cabbies went out on strike because of Uber. So I used to represent postal workers as a union official. I was the national president of the communications union, and I'd say to people, London cabbies going out on strike is like posties refusing to deliver the mail because of the existence of email. And in the union that I represented, I had sunrise and sunset. I had telco workers who could see what was happening with the rollout of the NBN and more people needing a new broadband infrastructure and new network. But I'd see postal workers that for every time broadband penetration increased, mail volumes dropped and put pressure on their jobs. But those guys, those members that I represented, realised that you couldn't fight change, so you needed to find ways to actually ease the pain on the way through and to smooth that path to open up new career opportunities for people. And that's a big challenge. And that Uber example that you mentioned, taxi drivers get so upset, and I say to them, I wish you would get upset at your taxi companies, because if they'd filled that space, that is putting all companies are sort of confronted with technological disruption, and the ones who stand still, the taxi drivers in this case are the ones most affected by an inability to move quickly, to recognise what's coming. It's a real challenge. And it's easy for me to get angry at the taxi companies, but the key, when you asked me that question earlier about what government can do, is to work out, well, how do we help those companies adjust? Not necessarily by chucking money at them, but what do we do to make the connections with people to help them in that process?
Yeah. I'm keen to hear questions from the audience. So before I turn to that, though, we do have a sort of a good slice of the Melbourne startup community here, and I did notice that in the Labor's budget reply, there was two particular initiatives. One was startup finance, and the other one was the Smart Investment Fund, which has got $500 million in it. Are you able to give us a sort of short précis on what those programs are all about?
So the first one is us talking with banking and finance, with the banking and finance sector, to see what can be done for particularly startups that find it hard to get access to capital early on because they've got no history, they've got no ability to be able to point to things that they've done to be able to secure support. And these are smaller loans to help support them. And what we've said is that these are things that we should definitely be exploring and putting the meat on the bones in that area, and we think there's some value there. The second, in terms of, there was a very successful industry innovation fund that helped co-invest that had been dismantled by the Abbott government. And when you look in different parts of the world, these co-investment funds have been set up to support venture capital, and not for the government to be a bank in itself, but to be able to, when the tyres have been kicked by venture capital and they have pressure tested the investment propositions being put forward, that if they do stack up, that how can government then work in with the private sector to ensure that there's an adequate level of capital there. And the third area, which is a sort of, I call it the sort of private sector micro business or micro lending scheme, is what I touched on earlier, which is crowdsource equity funding. That in other parts of the world where you've seen, I'm very conscious when I give this example, I'm very cautious about not saying this is precisely the same, but Kickstarter and Indiegogo providing crowd-based support for people that want to get money for their projects to get off the ground. Well, in this space, there have been other countries, New Zealand has done it, in the US they've been doing it, and in the UK and other places where they open up to the public to invest in early stage innovation. But you can't do that. You can't get equity in a lot of these startups because to do so breaches corporations law. So what are the changes we have to make to our legal framework to allow crowdsourced funding to occur and to ensure that you might be able to invest, and under Labor's proposition, being able to invest up to $20,000 across a number of investments, not all your eggs in one basket, but spread out to support and to provide critical finance for those startups that have exhausted the money that they got from friends and family, that can't necessarily get out of the venture capital or angel investor community and want to be able to find another way to source finance. So there are three areas where we're trying in that, where I said earlier that access to capital is really critical, that we're trying to support avenues to open up to help people when they've got an idea, they've got the people there, but they need money to take it further. We want to be able to be there to support them.
Sounds excellent. All right, keen to hear from audience members. I can see some hands going up first. The person in the third row there.
I think this is more of a discussion point as opposed to a specific question, Mr. Husic. Over the last 20 years or so, the federal government has run many programs to foster innovation, such as the COMET program, Commercialisation Australia. But ironically, the investment initiatives themselves have been largely the same. So how as the startup and entrepreneurial community can we encourage government to actually take those brave bipartisan steps to support the ecosystem more, and that inherently is actually innovative, and to be innovative in the way that it supports this particular small but vital sector of the economy. And perhaps is innovation in this government support actually required? Does government need to be innovative about the way it supports innovation? We've had programs that you touched on, like the Innovation Investment Fund. If you exclude medical devices and biotechnology, in fact, for 17 years, the IIF actually didn't perform very well, and therefore is history limiting our outlook on how we can improve?
Government being innovative, I don't know what these radical ideas, what type of things are you fostering here at MAP? But government does need to be innovative. Like if I can pick on a number of very good points that you made in terms of opening up that discussion. Government does need to look at improving the way that it operates in this space, and I am, for one, challenging the notion that all we do is just provide a lump of money either through grants programs or, if IIF operate in a particular way, it shouldn't be off limits to looking at ways to improve it. And I'm very much, the things that you've expressed have, they all are they've all hit buttons that I support wholeheartedly. You also made a very crucial point about bipartisanship. I think, so there's two things I'd make. We need to embrace this notion that being more innovative as a country and recognising that startups, the huge economic potential that exists there, that this needs to be almost be elevated to a sense of a national mission. And by that I mean not that we're starting up 5-year plans and a centralised economy and all that type of stuff, but recognising that politicians of all political hue need to think that if we are investing in this space, attention, priority, policy development, that we are making sure that government's getting out of the way of investments, dealing with some of the critical impediments that are holding back innovation in this country, that it's not seen as a niche area of examination and pursuit, that it's not a fad, which is what my concern is right now, that this has finally, after the community has been pushing and startups have been urging greater attention, it's now got on or within, the budget speech and the budget in reply speech in 1 year, that you've seen startups get, referenced in these critical speeches, which is great, but it can't disappear. It can't be something that was a one-hit wonder. This needs to be embedded in political thinking on both sides of politics. And so I certainly try to, and there's been a number of efforts to try and bring people together in this area. And I'm happy for a competition of ideas to occur, for the Liberals to develop something that gets support from people that are very keen to see innovation progress in this country, and Labor to do the same. and for us to battle it out to see who's got the best policy, because that's effectively what is happening in the startup community. But importantly, if I can make this point, as much as that's happening in the startup community, one of the things that struck me about the startup community, or two things: one, the very collaborative nature. People aren't possessive of ideas, they'll work with each other. I've seen it here and I've seen it abroad, where they say, well, we tried X, Y, Z, but actually turned to A, B, C and found that was more successful, and you might think that or might find that yourself. So there's a very collaborative nature, and I think as much as we can be competitive, political parties also need to recognise they have to work together to get things through. And the other thing that's been important too is within the startup community, a commitment to reinvest. The people who have been successful have not just, created wealth and then disappeared and exited. And what they do is they then get the next generation by investing in them and bringing them along. And again, politics needs to recognise that there's a commitment, not just for the here and now, but generationally, to keep bringing people in to see progress be secured. So we do need to think differently in this area and work cooperatively. I'm happy for ideas to be tested, but we can't afford for the type of divisive approaches to policy to continue, because our country will fail as a result of it. And the type of things that we need to see happen to create the new jobs into the future that will employ the next generation of Australians, we will not reach our full potential if we don't deal with some of these things. So I guess I've tried to touch on a number of you, like there's a very broad set of points that you raised, but I hope you'd get a sense that I think there are a number of areas where we do need to address these things very forcefully, I think.
Thank you.
Gentleman at the front here.
Thank you. Minister, Shadow Minister, it's very interesting that I found it, I resonated very much with the Honourable Bill Shorten's comments. So did Michael Cannon-Brookes, which he tweeted very quickly.
Yeah.
He resonated particularly about STEM, teaching and accelerating. I think we need to identify, say, 30 things we need to do 10, knowing 5 will fail, check 10 years, re-step, go again.
Yeah.
Now, capital markets reform. Yes, the smaller sector, which is crowdfunding, which might grow quickly, but at the top end, if you had a tick box on your super fund that said, I'd like to invest in job opportunities for my future grandchildren, would you tick it? Or would you go further and consider what the Canada pension funds have to do? Mandated 2% alternate asset class spread between private equity and VC. I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
So on that, you're absolutely right. And when I've discussed, for example, issues like crowd-sourced equity funding, I don't see that as the panacea. It's not the be-all and end-all. It's just, I think we need to have different avenues that people can tap into at various stages of their development that will provide them with a capital burst at a particular point in time. The issue that you've touched upon, absolutely. On my return from the States, I'd spoken with venture capitalists there who had surveyed our landscape and said two things relevant to the points that you've just raised. The first is they said to me that they saw a situation that in 5 years' time, that venture capital in Australia would just dry up, that our Indigenous venture capital would dry up. When I did an op-ed on that and I relayed those comments, I had local venture capital firms come at me. And I'd say to them, this is like you coming after Nostradamus's publisher. I'm just passing on the prediction. I'm not saying I subscribe to it, but I certainly recognise that this is one element that's been put out there. And if it is being seen that way, what are we doing about it? And then others would sort of say quietly after the fuss had died down, they'd sort of grab me and say, yeah, there's some concern that we will run out because the replenish rate is not strong enough. And the second point, coming directly to your issue, is if that's the situation, if that's the challenge, and I'd have a lot of US VCs say to me, you have like the 4th or 5th largest pension funds in the world. You have this massive pool of national savings, and yet you won't even dedicate portions of these to early stage innovation. And so you asked the question, would I tick the box? As a 45-year-old, I'm going to say to you, where I'm thinking close to retirement, I'm thinking, I'm going to have to be careful about those investment decisions. As someone who's getting into, like as a 20-year-old who knows they have a working life, who might be more prepared to invest in an aggressive investment strategy, yeah, there will be. I will personally, because I've got an affinity, interest, passion in the area, right? But what I'm saying to you is there'll be people that are close to retirement that may not be supportive of it. So there will be different people in different circumstances who are more prepared to take on an aggressive investment strategy and support it. So there will be that element of choice there, but how do we inform people that they've got that choice? Now, you've raised the issue of mandating, and that's been thrown around a lot, of compelling super funds to do this. And I'm going to be completely direct with you instead of the usual politician way of fudging around it. I'm not convinced about mandating. The reason being is because VCs have said, we need to do a better job. The reason why super funds don't invest in us is because we have historically, coming to your question about how other funds have operated, we haven't operated and haven't built the case and haven't had the investment proposition solid enough for super to invest. And they said, if we do that right, we could. And there's been cases of that. In the last week or so, Mark Carnegie has been able to convince super funds to invest $200 million into some biotech initiatives that he's got. And he hasn't benefited from a mandate to do it. What he has done is made sure that the fundamentals of the investment proposition have been solid enough to attract that support. So VCs are saying, we've got to do a better job on it. Where I think government can play a role is to try and bring those groups together, have potentially the co-investment funds that we touched upon to help chip in if the investment propositions are solid. But I have to say to you directly, I'm not convinced yet that mandating is the way to go, because I'm worried that if it forces that amount of money there, will people think that it's just an easy pot to tap into and not have something solid and durable into the future? And I think there is something, we don't want them to be starved of funds, but at the same time, we don't want a glut. We need to make sure that the investment propositions are solid and that they are worthy of that investment, and how can we get people together to realise that? And to do this type of things that you said, when people tick the box, will they have confidence that this comes through? I think that tick the box proposition that you put forward is very important in driving decisions and the quality of investments in the sector. I know I'm not going to necessarily make you happy with that answer, but it is something I've given a lot of thought to.
Okay, there's a question over there, and I'll come to the middle, and then we'll come over here. At the back there.
Hi, thank you. So it seems clear that we need more entrepreneurs to step up to the plate and invest in themselves and to create these new jobs. And from within the startup ecosystem, it's quite wonderful that it's been growing over the last few years. But ironically, the rate of new businesses is actually going down. Really, really down. It's really, really bad. And I think it's great that you're focusing on these problems around access to capital, which is definitely a significant problem. But the one thing I'm interested in is, what are you doing around education? Because it seems we need to widen the funnel at the top to get more people, especially young people, to consider entrepreneurship as a career path. And working within the sector myself, I'm working with the Foundation for Young Australians, and we don't see enough wide-reaching education going out to young people. It's great that we've got MAP and we've got these accelerators and incubators, but they're quite limited in the amount of people they can engage. So it's not really going to make a huge difference. There's a university in Melbourne, I won't name names, but it recently raised a $40 million donation from a donor for a new faculty where they can get 30 students per year to study entrepreneurship.
Oh, thank you.
That's not going to change. That's not going to fix the problem of getting more entrepreneurs into Australia. So what could government, Labor do to educate more young people with entrepreneurial skills so we can widen that funnel so that young people can become these job creators that we need them to be? Okay.
There are a number of really important points that underpin your question that I wanted to touch on. You're absolutely right. There's the ABS innovation stats showing that the number of particularly businesses that are engaged or are building innovation into their operations is not growing, that it's declining. There could be a number of reasons for that. The typical political response will be to blame one side of politics and the other, when in actual fact I think there are some fundamental issues that have been a problem for both Labor in government and Liberal in government, and that is we are just not the talent isn't there. Like what's happening is, you look at the number of IT graduates based on the Australian Information Industry Association's work in this area, and the Australian Computer Society both saying that we're probably training half the number of IT graduates compared to 10 years ago. The ones that are here, through a combination of things, their talent gets recognised overseas and they go over because remuneration packages are stronger. We in government, Labor in government, did not help when we'd made a change that affected the provision of employee share ownership that we thought would target the high end of town, and in actual fact prevented startups from being able to attract talent locally. And so that is an issue which is being corrected now, and we're working with the Libs on this. But there are, besides the focus on hard skills, which is STEM, we announced, for example, waiving HECS debt for people that take up education, the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, and also training up more teachers as well, 25,000 to be able to, in primary and secondary schools, build up an appetite for science and moving into maths disciplines or engineering as well. But there has to be, and this comes to the point you're raising in terms of entrepreneurialism, we can have, and universities are doing a lot. I was at Incubate yesterday at Sydney Uni, MAP obviously here, Union New South Wales. I visited Flinders and seen what they're doing out at Tonsley Park on the grounds of the old Mitsubishi factory that shut down, and so they're now trying to find new ways of generating economic growth and employment growth in that state. But the soft skills that you talk about, the sense of entrepreneurialism and the desire to be able to start your own business, that stuff you can't flick a switch on, and I think that is embedded within your question. You just can't expect people at university level to go, I'm going to start a business. You need to start that, get a desire for that early on. And there are programs in terms that we can, instead of doing the type of traditional grants programs that exist, where can we invest money that makes a difference to build that sense, that desire to become an entrepreneur? And there are things that we can invest. So we can do in that space. So it needs to be a combination of the focus on hard skills, but also complementing that with building and fostering that interest in entrepreneurialism and starting your own company and being able to use the opportunities that really for this generation present themselves in a way that completely escaped previous generations, the ability to affect change at a large level. I was commenting recently at a launch of something that we did in Sydney, that politicians, and Chris Bowen was involved and I was involved, I said, we tried to change the world. We thought you could change the world one page of Hansard at a time, and you guys are changing it one app at a time. And that change, that desire to see change that can be brought through a technological platform, you need to work on that, have a longer term view about that is not just addressed by a simple funding program now, but recognising an investment that takes place over 10, 15, 20 years in skills development. And that's my big worry, is that we have not dedicated enough long-term thinking, and that is why we have a low number of graduates, a low number of skills, and the ones that do get pinched, like over 20,000 Australians are in Silicon Valley, I found out this year. 20,000. Imagine that brain power, combining with the interest that's here and that is being fostered by MAP and others, so that we can see that growth to the levels that you believe that drives your question. Imagine that. And we do need to find the answers to that. And as I said, both sides of politics we have not put the key to unlock how we address it, but at least there is now a focus on both sides of politics that we need to look at this area in terms of encouraging innovation, but it's not just something that can go click, you need to have that long-term view. Thanks. So I hope that answers your question. I know there's a lot to cover off in a very exhaustive question.
Now I'm keen to get through as many questions as possible, so we're going to do quick fire questions and rapid response answers.
Yes.
Gentleman in the middle.
I want to start with two quick observations and then my question. The first one is,
Quick fire
I know, and
questions,
the
rapid
problem is
response
he's got a
answers.
PhD, you haven't got a chance. First, despite the mythology to the contrary, Silicon Valley is fundamentally built on Department of Defence funding, right? Basically built on a huge government investment in scientific infrastructure. You look in Israel, you see the same thing in Singapore. Second, I had a conversation on the weekend with someone who's building a big software platform. He has a large development team in Tashkent, and they're doing a great job for him, and there's one person in Australia. My question is, if you go for a policy that says we're not giving grants, we're just going to encourage local startups, are you going to be about 20 years behind the money? And perhaps what we need in addition is a government policy that looks for a very clever, seamless integration from science investment through to entrepreneurship, so that the entrepreneurs have something to commercialise or build from that gives them a differentiated product or service to take to the market. And so perhaps the urging is for a slightly more sophisticated policy analysis and policy.
Okay, so very rapid response.
Yes.
We had a significant, well, on the face of it, it's great to see the incentives that were announced in last week's budget for small business. But you can't equate small businesses to startups, where they're trying to encourage a lot of disruption and change to business models. And if I had my way, I'd be making sure that we were able to support, when I say to you, I'm not interested in the old grant systems that went in place. I want something, or I'm certainly advocating, and I'm one voice, right? There are a range of different options that are being floated around in our policy development process. But what I want to see is what I was indicating earlier, where the private sector has thoroughly assessed investment propositions, and we, through the added weight of government, can invest in that and help support that because it'll have a big impact in terms of reach, global reach, job creation, economic activity benefit, then we should do it, right? But I don't want us to do dinky schemes that don't have that big bang for the buck, right? So I'm not saying per se that we not get involved, but I want us to be involved there. And I also want us to invest because the sector says, we can't invest in education. You can. Government can use its power to make sure that we address the type of things that were in the last question of trying to have the hard and the soft skills developed. Government can remove regulatory barriers. That's in their remit to do. Government can find ways to encourage the flow of capital. So there are a number of things besides having that pool of money to invest where there's absolute direct government action that can be done that'll have a meaningful long-term benefit. Quick answer. How's that?
That's good.
Okay.
Over here.
I don't want an Uber-style rating system on the satisfaction with the answers.
My question is regarding the healthcare industry and the innovative ideas and sort of digital strategies that the government has towards that. The PCHR, sort of NETA, is that enough, or should maybe some more money be put in towards private companies and startups and things to look at a digital sort of strategy to sort of help that sort of come along?
Well, it's funny you should say that. I visited a great place today that is very active in this space, that has been supported by a person who had a very successful career in investment banking and could have stayed there quite comfortably and retired, but said no, he wanted to invest in innovation and in a startup that is looking at levering off the data that's being created by this huge initiative that we kickstarted to basically digitise all the medical records of every single citizen in the country, and then be able to work out how you can target healthcare to individuals that would also, for example, tap into the data that's generated off wearable technology. If you've got a Fitbit or a Jawbone, the Fitbit, for example, their API allows people to be able to tap into that data. They're not possessive of that. And it's Sanoa Health, and John Stewart was the person that I caught up with today, who's the CEO of that outfit. And the stuff that they are doing there is phenomenally, they are investing a lot of thought and energy to get this right that will actually add value in a remarkable number of ways. And so there is some good stuff being done in this space. And what's interesting too, coming back to that thing I mentioned earlier about don't replicate Silicon Valley, what other countries have done is think about their strengths and lever off them. UK wants to become a regional hub for fintech, and they've focused on that one area, done very well. Other countries have done likewise. Australia is recognised as having a very solid health system, and a lot of people investing in this area. $140 billion spent on healthcare. 80% of it could actually, with preventative health, make a big difference to the size of that budget. And so, is health tech an area where we can lever off an existing strength through the application of technology to see ourselves develop economic benefit because of that commitment in innovation, but deliver a very important benefit to the quality of life? So I think there is a lot there, but there's something also to be said about us taking as a community-wide approach, levering off our existing strengths to do something meaningful that we can, have an impact on the world stage.
Thank you very much. Gentleman at the back there.
Thanks. Ed, in regards to starting up the funnel arrangement and increasing the pipeline of young entrepreneurs coming into the system,
Yep.
There was a lot of work done in Northern Adelaide a number of years ago around Salisbury High School.
Yeah.
I've got the documentation of that, and we've got some good documentation of the advantage of that. So I'm happy to share that and move on. The second point is there is a real risk, it seems to me, in the debate around startups, that it'll be startup.com captured.
Yeah.
As opposed to the fact that agribusiness is a serious opportunity in Australia, food's a serious opportunity, health science is a serious opportunity, et cetera, advanced manufacturing. All of those have got enabling capabilities that are more than simply IT. Mm-hmm. And those enabling capabilities have to come through to allow the startups to actually emerge in that space as well. Yep. So the Silicon Valley model is too narrow for us to think about, given the nature of the Australian economy and the way in which we can evolve into the future.
So there's some things that I'd agree with you and other things that I'd probably take a different view on. Let me start with courageously with the negative, which is when you say the Silicon Valley model is too narrow, I mean, the things that they are thinking about and working on, the breadth of it, I mean, I can't necessarily agree. I know what you're trying to get at, but again, I just want to assure you, I'm not interested in us just, basically picking up a model and then, trying to force it in the Australian context. See what works there, availability of talent, capital, and the sort of commitment to remove regulatory hindrance. But also recognise they're doing so much. Everything is up for grabs. And so we should recognise that. But your other point that I do agree with, and I come back to this point about, in reference to your question on health, is again looking at our strengths and seeing how we can lever off that to gain advantage. You're absolutely right. In agribusiness, we have a huge opportunity with the demand for our food, clean, fresh food, and a reliable supply at that. What do we do through the application of technology to change the way the harvesting, the quality, the availability of that, and change the way land use occurs as well to support that. That is available to us. People that I spoke to today in venture capital, I caught up with after I met with Sanoa Health, saying that they just completed a trip into WA where there are a lot of people thinking about in the mining area about how, again, the application of technology can make a difference. They're already doing it. Those huge trucks that are moving earth that are done completely driverless. They are thinking of ways of applying technology in the way that they operate, and they're doing it in a frightening way too, because that impact on the mining boom. Where in LNG, for example, it might take 35,000 people to construct that facility and only 5,000 to run it. Huge difference in the number of people. The application of technology changing the demand profile for labour. But again, look at what we did well, what we do well, what are our strengths in the economy, and see how we can enhance that through bringing together innovation and existing strength, and then build something further. So I get in trouble because I often say we've made a lot of money out of digging up dirt or making money off what's grown on the top of it. And we need to think differently about it. And yeah, we do, but that doesn't mean it's an either-or proposition. It doesn't mean just because mining is slowing down that's it and we shelve that part of our economy. We have to think differently about where our wealth will be made into the future and where our jobs will be created into the future.
Okay, we've got 5 minutes left, so let's get through as much as we can. Charlie, do you want to go? Oh, sorry, go to the back and then we'll come forward to you, Charlie.
Hi, English is not even my second language, so please bear with me. I would relate to what a couple of gentlemen said about the importance of mathematics and science here. I'd say that Russia at the beginning of the 20th century was a peasant country, feudal country, and they heavily invested aggressively in education. In 1950s and 60s, top mathematician of 20th century of Russia led the team that went to Khrushchev and said, this is what we need if you want to survive Cold War. Now, I come from, my whole life was spent between Soviet Union and China and similar countries. And I worked in #1 school in the world in the field of mathematics. I came here and I'm asked in United Kingdom, America and Asian countries to open the school that I want to bring here actually. And my question to you is, what can you do to help Australia and to help everyone and people like me to do their business actually? So what is it that you politicians can do? Because this is partially the list of institutions that I had to go to do my business, and they have no clue about what I'm trying to do actually. So Victorian Registration and Qualification Authority, Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority, Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority, Department of Education and Training, Department of Education and Early Childhood Development, Australian Curriculum, Education Services Australia, the Australian Curriculum in Victoria, Victorian Tertiary Admission Centre, Australian Institute for Teaching and Leadership, Victorian Institute of Teaching, International Education, Department of Education, Education Services for Overseas Students, Commonwealth Register. So this is roughly 1/10 of the list. And it's a complexity that exists just to give them jobs. Yeah. Like I gave them proof that this is #1 school in the world. We have a waiting list, Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, Stanford. There are waiting lists. We don't have enough students to give them. My student is #1 in the International Mathematical Olympiads of all times. I give them all proof, and they're like, well, you know, you have to... What is it that you can do to make our life easier? And actually, schools like that will be feeders to School of Engineering, you know, to School of Mathematics or Physics. Those are the people that lead science in China, in Russia, and in America. By the way, Stanford report says that 70% of their scientists are imported, not their own. So what is it that you can do for us?
Listen to the answer now. It's a very good question.
Thank you.
Well, to your point about government can't be innovative, I mean, that's an impressive list. I mean, you just don't do that overnight.
There's a lot of jobs there.
Absolutely. What a job creator. That is, look, if I can answer directly, there's not much, well, there is something that can be said about trying to collapse a range of those bodies and trying to get some sort of efficiencies by doing that. And the problem has been because of the way our education system works, so many people have an input at the state and federal level as to the way in which education operates in this country and across departments as well. I mean, some of them, I think you mentioned accreditation or recognition of skills that don't necessarily exist in education departments but might be in other departments, relating to skills or to occupations that would be regulated by those departments. So it is definitely a challenge, and it's one of the reasons why when I say I don't want us to necessarily invest in massive grants programs that have a whole selection panel behind them and teams of public servants. I'm not disparaging public servants, but what I'm saying is if you have that money, you have the tendency of doing what is embedded within your list of authorities that you read out, the 1/10 that is there. So being able to continually think about flattening structures has to be a priority in fast-tracking or being able to get support moving in a very quick way and not being chewed up by a sort of job creation program within the public space when it's really in the private sector that you want to see that happen. But it is a reminder too of, again, when you hear those lists, and it doesn't matter what side of politics you're on, every single name, as you were going through that list, my shoulders were going lower and lower. I'm like, okay, I get the point, but that is a challenge for government. I can continue. No,
Maybe afterwards
you do not need to be my Russian equivalent of Anthony Robbins motivating me in ways I don't know.
Okay, Charlie Day.
What's he asking a question for? I talk to him all the time.
I just want to ask you in public. So, I mean...
oh, wow.
We talked a little bit about education, and given we're at university, I'm going to ask you a university question. So happily, our Vice-Chancellor, as you know, is very interested in politics. So I'm going to imagine that Glyn Davis becomes the member for Chifley for a day, and you become Vice-Chancellor of the University of Melbourne for a day. What are you going to do?
Ages to get into politics, and boom, you got rid of me.
What are you going to do to change this university, or you can take any university or university sector more generally? What are you going to do to change the universities to be more effective contributors to this innovation economy?
Yeah, okay, good question. And thanks for asking me while I'm in a university. Nothing awkward about that. Well, okay, so there's the regular criticism is that I get of, and this is not something that is just confined to Australian universities, but it could be in other parts of the world as well, and that is unlocking the intellectual wealth, if I can put it that way, not putting an economic value, but there's this huge potential that exists in the research work that's done, and how do you actually commercialise that and make that more readily available for people to take advantage of and to build further economic value off that. So there is a big criticism about that I pick up regularly that, well, how do we do that? And we actually, as you recall, we were at, Charlie and I were at, as part of the Australian-American Leadership Dialogue, we went and visited the University of California San Diego campus, where a guy there who heads up the information technology and communications is the chair of the Qualcomm chair there, Peter Cowie, talked about finding ways in which universities can share assets, for example, that they possess with the startup community, so that they can come in and use the equipment to be able to progress innovation in the areas that they're focused on. So it's not just about commercialising and incentivising the release of the work that's being done by academia in the commercial sphere, but actually better using the physical assets and having startups co-locate. And I understand there may be a university in our very immediate vicinity that's doing just that. And that needs to be accelerated. The work that's being done, and I picked up on the point that was being raised earlier in the question about, okay, you're getting, and as I said, Incubate, for example, in 2 years, supported 40 startups. The number, I think, down the back that someone asked me the question on, you're saying that's good, but is that enough? Well, clearly, no, it's not. But we need to start somewhere. And universities, once they recognise, for example, in the Incubate Sydney Uni example, Sydney Uni did not invest in that incubator. The student union did. The incubator went to the university and said, we'd like to be able to identify small grants that we can give to people that we know have an idea and be able to develop that and take it further. And the uni said, great idea, we're not going to support it. Went to the student union, they did. They then started seeing success, and then the university went, actually, we want to change our mind. And they're putting money into it as well, and they're widening it. So as success is generating success, it's increasing the numbers. The question is it fast enough? Answer is no, it needs to be sped up, but there's reason to be hopeful. And being able to find ways of changing the reward system for academic pursuit here, where you can commercialise. Someone mentioned Stanford, and in Stanford, they allow a much freer movement of academics from within Stanford to go out and do their own thing commercially and then come back into the university fold. There's something to be looked at there. Does it work neatly for every single university? Probably not, but we need to be able to explore that further. So if I had my way, it'd be looking at commercialisation, changing incentive structures, making it more flexible in terms of people that are in the academic space going into the commercial world, coming back, increasing the level of support for those type of incubators on site, introducing more entrepreneurialism. What Uni of Sydney did, Matt Barry from Freelancer actually said to the Uni of Sydney, what are you doing to encourage entrepreneurialism? Not in the business school, in the engineering space. And so they started actually marrying the two there, and he's now a guest lecturer there on an occasional basis, but they're thinking laterally. That's good, we need to encourage it further.
All right, we're all running 5 minutes over time. We do have a little bit of a buffer, so I'm just going to take one last question and one here, and then we'll call it a wrap. I think, have you already had a question? All right, 3 quick, and we'll keep it really rocket fast. Okay, you at the back.
Because we're losing people already, as you can see. So,
last 3 questions.
Sorry to make that. There's one fan. Go on.
Just following on from that question earlier on bipartisanship, I guess I'm sort of largely ignorant of the sort of broad philosophical positions on the political parties. So I'm just sort of curious, like, you know, to the extent that sort of both parties do have an ongoing interest in this space, you know, what are the philosophical positions they bring to this sort of broad area? And I guess I'm sort of, you know, I'd like to be able to look at something and go, wow, that really has the stamp of, you know, ALP, or that really has the stamp of LIV, without making any value judgments about this or that. But, you know, what kind of broad set of thoughts are being brought to bear on this problem?
Yeah, okay. Yep.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to
Sorry, did you want me to whisper that response?
I'll ask 3 questions to be asked, and then Ed can answer all 3 in a final run home. Gentleman here at the front.
Hi, Ed. The question I have is, we've talked a lot about what government can do for the entrepreneurial community. What can the entrepreneurial community do to help government do their job better?
Yep.
Good one.
Excellent question.
And last question, gentleman at the back.
Sorry, can you rethink that question? Give me an easier one. Thanks.
Is it going to work? Like big problem.
Okay. Do you mean the mic or?
Which order do you want to take those ones in, Ed?
So your question was, will all this effort actually, you know, pan out? Yeah, sure. Okay. It would be weird. You would never have imagined a time that Labor MPs would speak with enthusiasm about entrepreneurialism, because it was always seen that that was the preserve of the Liberal Party, because they were about small business and supporting the development of capital and over Labor, etc. But Labor to survive needs to change. One, needs to recognise, and we have reform, in terms of economic reform, had to undertake some fairly big reforms that have gone against or been very uncomfortable for our traditional sport base, but we've done it because we recognise if the economy doesn't change and the jobs aren't there, the people that are affected are the people that traditionally vote Labor. So for us, we've had to change, and from my perspective, my passion in this space is because I'm not interested in the buzz of technology and the latest gadget. What I'm interested in is the way it changes relationships and the way it's opening up opportunity, particularly for young people who have a much greater impact or ability to affect change than any other generation before it. And so that is something that I'm very excited to be involved in. If I can do something in a small way as one MP to get our party to be a lot more engaged in this space, fantastic. But I don't have to work very hard because we're very much interested in this area. So that's, for us, it's about making sure we can seize opportunity, but also to make sure we don't lose opportunity for people that won't have the jobs that previously existed. In terms of I think there's a lot that can be done in changing the way government works, because when you look at the disruption that is occurring right now, what's happening is startups are targeting, I'll use this very advisedly, but to come to your question, they are looking at places where consumers are upset with the business model, that service is not being delivered at a price or at a quality that they're satisfied with, and so they're targeting them and they're trying to change those models. That will happen with government too. If there is a way that startups can change the delivery of service and the way that it can be priced as well in terms of cost to government, then there is a huge value there in terms of changing the way that that works. Opening up our data more and more so the private sector can examine that, bearing in mind the privacy and security implications. Those are threshold issues, but once you get over that, the whole data that's collected by government and being able to provide that to the private sector to then generate economic wealth and change the way that people work, not just from a material sense, but a quality of life sense, I think there's huge prospect in that. And to answer your question, it has to. Because if it doesn't, then there are a lot of people, like we're already seeing jobless higher now than compared to the GFC. So there are immediate factors that are driving up unemployment. But my worry is that we carry that weight of joblessness, long-term joblessness, into the future, and it's compounded through technological change. We have no choice but to change if we want the quality of people's lives to be better. I don't want standard business as usual, life as it was approach. It has to be better. And so, you'll get that through, coming to your question earlier in terms of, you reflected on Soviet Russia and the advances of every society that has invested more in education has seen a commensurate benefit flow from that. And so we need to answer your very stark question, if we don't, the quality of life of people, particularly the ones that I represent, are worse off, and I can't abide that situation.
All right.
You didn't think I'd make that.
Well, I've been very impressed. The audience has worked you hard, Ed, which is what we wanted to see tonight, and would expect no less from a MAP event. Wen, I think we're in your hands.
Thank you, Nick. Nick and Ed, thank you both very much for sharing your time and insights and expertise with us this evening. I have a small token of appreciation on behalf of the MAP team for you, which I hope you enjoy. And so thank you again for generously contributing to our community here this evening. Everyone, would you please join me in a warm round of applause for Nick and Ed?